What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Nick.
I'm Jammin.
And we are back with a retro review. We haven't done one of these in a while, and we figured since January is generally a little bit slower, though from what I've seen in the release schedule, there's still plenty coming out.
Yeah, man, next week's going to be a banger.
Yeah, but we wanted to squeeze in some retro reviews because there's still a lot of albums that we want to go over that, well, I mean, some of these bands only had a one album run or two or three or four, and then, you know, we kind of cut it off there because if you got more than five, we could probably rank you. So today we are going to go over the lone full length from Funebre, Children of the Scorn. It's not quite Children of the Corn. It's a little bit different. It's decidedly less American. This album came out in late 1991. In fact, for the life of me, I could not find an exact date as to when this album came out. It came out originally on Spine Farm Records. But first, we're going to go into the history of this band because this is one of the OG Finnish death metal bands. In fact, I would say they're one of the bands that is largely responsible for the scene kind of taking off, like with them and Abhorrence and Convulse, and then later with Amorphous and Sentenced, and then, of course, the mighty Demolich. Finland got an awesome death metal scene going, and I think this album is very important in there. So this band formed in either 1988 or 1989. It's kind of hard to say because, again, the history on this band is kind of hard to find out. This band formed in the town of Paimio in Finland from another area that I will have difficulty pronouncing, but we're going to get up to the OG lineup here, and, well, everyone's seen me struggle with Finnish. Get ready to see that again.
Yep, and he made me look at it and made me try to read it, and it was the same struggle, so we could struggle together, but he's already got it written down. I don't have it written down.
That means nothing.
Why dual struggle?
Anyway, their original lineup was one Esa Vahasoirinki on bass. He fortunately went by Ertzi, and I'm just going to call him Ertzi from now on. Seppo Kitila on drums, Sampa Hapio on guitars, and Jari Heinonen? Sure. Anyway, he was on vocals. So this original lineup would record the Cranial Torment EP in 1989, and then briefly broke up the same year, which is kind of odd. It was mostly due to the fact that Seppo and Sampa would actually just leave the band. Seppo actually formed Monstrosity, not to be confused with the Florida Monstrosity. This is the Finnish Monstrosity, which didn't last very long. And then Sampa formed Interment, not to be confused with the Swedish Interment, which their Interment didn't last very long either.
They were both finished.
God, you're terrible. Anyway, the band would end up reforming in 1990, and that was due to the fact that they found some new members. Now, Esa would actually switch from bass to rhythm guitars, and they added lead guitarist Sami Uusitalo and his brother Toni Uusitalo. I assume they're brothers. I would imagine that's not a common name, but I'm not Finnish. That could be like a super common name, like Smith or Jones.
Right,
I don't know.
Have you met the Usitalos? All 300 of them?
Yeah.
Over there.
They all live in the same town. We can't pronounce that place either. So this lineup would actually record their 1990 demo, which was a big improvement over the original demo, and we'll talk about the demos a little bit more after we go over the album itself. And the fact that the 90 demo actually had two guitarists on it versus one single guitarist on it, it kind of opened up their sound a little bit more. And this band was largely inspired by a lot of Swedish death metal, namely Nihilist / Entombed, Grave, Dismember, and Carnage. And you can definitely hear that in their early demos. It's very raw, and, you know, there's a lot of Swedish death metal tropes to it.
They're very raw, like undercooked meat raw.
Yeah, that's been left out in the sun, like the sun's cooking it. And it's cold in Finland, so I don't know if the sun shows up very often. Also, later that year, they released the Brain Spoon EP, which was released on the Whisper in Darkness Records. Now, Sammy wasn't on this one because these were re-recordings of older tracks from the first demo, so they only needed one guitarist, so he just said, well, no, it's fine, and those songs are kind of weird anyway. Like, what the fuck is a brain spoon? I have no idea. It's like a melon baller?
That would be my guess.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Now, sometime after that, I assume possibly 1991, again, finding information on this was kind of difficult, they signed with Spine Farm Records, and they were in the studio from June through July of 1991. So my guess is this album was probably released sometime either late summer or like early fall, maybe. I don't know. Again, either way, they released Children of the Scorn, and this is the part where we review it.
Now, this is my first go at this record. Surprise, surprise. Like I've said before, you just don't get to everything. There's just no way to listen to all of it unless you're this guy and insane and listen to everything. But, it was the first go for me, and while I've never heard of this band, I've been listening to Finnish death metal for a while, so, immediately there are recognizable tropes. The first track, Waiting for Arrival, opens up with very chuggy, very melodic riffs. I think this song is one of the most straightforward songs on the record. Just a regular, double kick pattern, straightforward drums. Really cool melody and harmony parts, though. Crunchy guitars, almost beefy, but not really. It's weird because it's, a mix in the early 90s. But, I thought the guitars sounded really, 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 really good for that time period. It's
interesting that this band actually got Timo Tolkki to do all of the production on here. Founding member of Stratovarius, he ended up leaving the band. So, very guitar-centric guy. And what's really cool is, despite them being heavily influenced by Swedish death metal, it's not a buzzsaw tone, and honestly, it doesn't sound like Swedish death metal at all. In fact, I think this is even riffier in some spots than a good chunk of Swedish death metal, which is definitely saying something, but it doesn't have all the hallmarks of it. The buzzsaw tone, there's not a lot of D beats and kind of that crust punk sort of underlying feel. This is surprisingly very technical and very intricate and just a wild listen. And Waiting for Arrival really only kind of teases a bit of that.
Yeah. If you would have first looked at my notes, when I first started writing notes for this, it was, drums are really straightforward, not a whole lot going on, and then the record just opens up. And they don't even really tease that. There are some cool riffs in the first song, but it really opens up from Sinner's Eve all the way to the end.
One of my favorite hallmarks of Finnish death metal is the almost death doom sound, or flat out death doom sound. And hearing it in kind of its infancy here is really cool. Blood on White opens up with, I wouldn't even call it a death doom riff. It's a flat out doom metal riff.
It is.
It sounds like you just put on a Candlemass album, and it just sounds a lot grittier than whatever Candlemass album you put on. Or even going back as far as Black Sabbath, you have these heavy, droning, descending, doomy riffs, and it's really cool in terms of the mood setting. And it's kind of a cool segue into what they do on a bulk of this album is just fly. There are a lot of thrashy drum patterns and just super intricate, heavy machine gun chugs and tremolos, but that is only one part of their riffy wheelhouse, because I swear they try just about everything they can in terms of just interesting, intricate, but also catchy riffs on this album.
Very Demolish, to be honest. Not quite as disjointed, I would say, as Demolish is sometimes, but they're all over the map, from the cool off-time crawling riff in Shiver to the absolutely wild riff pattern in Walls That Held Screams.
That is probably my favorite track on this album. That song is absolutely amazing.
And every riff is catchy. Even though there's a ton going on, they don't sacrifice the earworms during those times.
Basically, dynamics are just a huge part of this, and it's really cool hearing a band that was very young, and again, they took a lot of their main influences and really kind of put a stamp on what was a style that was kind of in its infancy. Finnish death metal really didn't have as many big landmark releases. I would say Sentenced and Amorphous really kind of pushed them to the next level in terms of getting them noticed. Funebre was very much in that early phase where, this is definitely something different and kind of a totally different style. But you can also pick apart their influences on here. There's a lot of stuff on here that I would compare to early Bolt Thrower, definitely some Carcass vibes on certain songs. You get a lot of thrashy gallops, and the drum performance honestly reminds me a lot of Ken Owen, but even busier. This is one of the busiest drum performances I think I've heard in a while in terms of old school death metal.
And the drum performance seems very free-flowing at times. There were times where I thought maybe the turnover wasn't landed correctly, or maybe he came in a little too early for a fill, because there's just constant fills. Almost in the vein of Bron Daler, but not quite, his single-stroke roll technique, but just non-stop fills. It's almost like the straightforward beat, nah, wait, we can do that. I have toms. I might as well use them for a reason.
But it works because it matches with the intricacy of all the riffs. Because this album is kind of shifty in its transitions. Like, every song on here is kind of a riff buffet. You do get, like, a lot of repeated riffs, like Blood on White, Shiver. I would say The Wall That Held Screams has some great repeated melodies. Again, like, every hook, every riff on that song, I think, is just absolutely awesome. That is, like, one of the big standouts on here. But, I mean, a lot of this, I think, is just really wildly creative, and you can kind of tell that they're a young band because they really want to try everything. There's even some, like, really interesting hardcore nods on Slumber's End. Like, it starts off really blasty, heavy tremolos, there's some thrashy riffs in there, but around the middle of the song, like, it kind of breaks into this mid-tempo groove, and the riffs kind of shift over to almost what I would call, like, kind of a hardcore breakdown.
Yeah, big chugs. Breakdowns aren't real plentiful in here. Waiting for Arrival had them, and then Walls That Held Screams had them. But when they do happen, they dry hump it. Like, long enough for it to stick in your head and go, okay, here's this heavy groove. We're finally out of the chaos. They pepper them in nicely.
And there's some really well done atmosphere in here. They do use some synths very lightly. You hear them on, like, Congenital Defeat. The Wall That Held Screams has some really creepy whispers towards the end. Like, they kind of loop that. And even Shiver has some cool synths, as well as some, like, really interesting spoken word along one of the breakdowns. The synths on here in particular remind me a lot of Altars of Madness, like how you heard light synths just kind of popped in every now and then just for effect. But one of the cool things I think that adds a lot of atmosphere are Jari's vocals. His vocals are awesome on here. He roars his guts out. They're very powerful. You even get some, like, deep, almost brutal death metal growls on Waiting for Arrival. He sounds like a shaved down gorilla in a battle vest, just barking at everyone in the audience and probably threatening them too.
He actually reminds me a lot of Glenn Benton. Like, a lot of Glenn Benton. Like, it's in his growls. You can definitely hear it. Especially early on Deicide when it was just, like, balls out, just like, that's it.
He doesn't have, like, any other high screams. Like, all of it is kind of just, like, a more uniform, deep growl, but it's effective. And, I mean, honestly, it sounds like a lot of Finnish death metal I've heard after this album, too. So, again, I would say this kind of set a standard in a way, too. Now, again, one of my favorite things about Finnish death metal is the death doom aspects, and those are plentiful over here, and generally kind of done in, like, riffy pockets. You get, like, kind of a good breakdown that kind of leads into these single droning riffs, but it kind of loses a bit of that, like, kind of around Wall That Held Screams. Granted, I have no complaints about that one not being doomy enough because it's, again, an absolutely amazing song.
Yep.
But after the brief instrumental Spirits We Wail, which is honestly really pretty, I actually like that. Like, it's an interlude that I could actually listen to. It kind of loses a bit of that doomy side, and it doesn't really kind of bring it back until you get to, like, the last two tracks, Redeemed from Time and Grip of Insanity.
And something to elaborate on that, too. The song Slumber's End, when you get to, like, the 3-minute mark, it acts like the song is over. Like, it's an obvious false ending. And there's, like, a 2-3 second break, and when they come back in, I thought they were going to doom it, and they didn't. It just went right back into the riffs, which is great. I'm not knocking them on that, but, like, I thought they were going to go doomy, because to me that would have been a very appropriate time to do so, and they didn't do it.
I mean, it was kind of a cool false ending. Like, you kind of get this fill, and then it kind of drops out. You get a bit of that distortion, and it kind of turns into just, like, a bolt thrower style, like, double time groove jam. Like, they just hammer on these riffs. You get a couple of key changes and a wailing lead, and it's got a cool fade out, which fade outs on here are kind of odd, and we listened to two different versions of this. On the Extreme Music version that I have, which I believe came out in 2011, there are some weird choices of fade outs on certain tracks. Like, I think the first two are just kind of, I don't know, they kind of oddly fade out. But between Shiver and Congenital Defeat, there is, like, a weird fade out on the end of Shiver, but honestly a really cool fade in on Congenital Defeat. So
kind of like a phaser.
Yeah. I like the weird effects on there. Now, one of these songs was a re-recorded one from their 1990 demo, which was Grip of Insanity, and you can definitely tell the difference in terms of, like, style, in terms of what they were influenced by, because this one, honestly, it sounds like a Lost Grave song or a Lost Unleashed song. Like, in fact, the galloping double time rhythm reminded me of Before the Creation of Time, which is off of Unleashed first album, and honestly one of my favorite songs by them. But yeah, it's straight up more like meat and potatoes.
Yeah, very, again, straightforward. Almost the same straightforward that Waiting for Arrival was. It has obvious differences because you get through the bulk of this record where it's insane and there's crazy turnovers and a bunch of wild transitions and riffs galore, and you get to the end and it's obviously simpler. Like, obviously, you know, this is where they started. But at the same time, at the end of that song, I got my Death Doom breakdowns, and then I was happy.
Yeah, there's some gross closing riffs on that. As for like any negatives I have on here, they're pretty minimal. Honestly, like at times it does feel a little too unhinged, and again, it's the drum work and the constantly shifting riffs, so it is kind of hard to follow at points. But generally, whenever it comes out of those more confusing moments, you're being greeted to another kick-ass riff. So yeah, I can't really complain much about that.
Yeah, my complaints would be minor too. Like, obviously, I have a couple of gripes about the mix, but it's 1991. So, I mean, you know, you got to give it a little bit of leeway there. Like, I just probably would have tweaked some things, but again, it's 1991. I don't really have any complaints either. Even the parts where it does feel like it's going to fly off the rails, it adds to the aggression of the song, too. And a lot of these are just balls out, you know, Shiver, again, Walls That Held Screams, like both those songs. Those are ones where it had moments of that insanity, but they bring it back with another tasty riff, and then you have no choice but to fall in love with it again. So not really a gripe either.
And I think it's really cool that this actually kind of stands out even from like the Finnish death metal pack in a lot of ways, like just in their riff construction, the songwriting. It's still different from Demolish. It's still different from Convulse and Sentence and Amorphous and all the fucking awesome Finnish death metal bands. So yeah, this has a lot of repeat value in terms of like listening to it. And again, a super underrated album that I think kind of gets overlooked in terms of that scene. And I'm going to go ahead and give it 4 stars. I dig the hell out of this. I've been listening to this one since I got the 2011 Extreme Music Edition, which, granted, the mix is kind of cut off, at least on the bass end, but it still sounds good. You still get to appreciate all the amazing riffs on here. Like, this is just a monster of an album, and I like the fact that it's kind of fearless in a way. Like, they were willing to try a lot of different stuff, and this was a really young band really trying to figure out their sound, but you kind of hear, like, the journey of it, and, man, when they land it, like, again, Walls That Held Screams, that is an absolutely amazing song. Shivers, Sinner's Eve, Slumber's End. Dude, Grip of Insanity, despite it being a more old school, kind of like traditional Swedish death metal-ish song, still, they absolutely nail the sound. If you're a big fan of Finnish death metal, I mean, I guess I could say you should know this, but I mean, again, it's kind of an obscure band just because they only had this one full length, but if you have never checked this out, and you're a big fan, again, of like Demolish, Sentenced, Gorephilia, you know, I mean, just Finnish death metal in general, check this out. It's an awesome album.
I'm going to give it 4 stars as well. Being a first-time listener to this band, like, immediately you catch on to where they were going, and you hear so many influences from so many other camps, even stuff here in America. This album is great. The riffs are all very exciting. Every riff is catchy. There's a constant melodic hook. They do well to interject in little harmonies and these really rad tremolo riffs. Like, they don't lay heavy on the tremolo because there is a lot of chug, but man, very entertaining. Again, songs like Sinner's Eve, Blood on White, the absolute beast that Walls That Held Screams is, the violence of Redeemed from Time, all the doomy moments. The record grabs you and it really doesn't let go. Like, I never stop banging my head, never stop moving. Not only does it have the Finnish influences, but I hear a lot of like Floridian death metal in there too. Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, and then of course Sabbath and Demolish and Celtic Frost, even kind of Kerry King style leads. I mean, they're not real, you know, intricate by any means, but it's a lot of squawks and dive bombs and whatnot.
It's appropriate.
Yeah, it is. You'll see. Jam this record. I would definitely recommend it. I'm sure it's gonna wind up in my playlist now in the future just because it's such a badass album. I would definitely recommend checking it out.
So before we get into what happened in this band, I do want to talk about the demos a little bit because you can hear pretty much like incremental steps in getting a lot better throughout the demos, and honestly, they're kind of interesting. The first one, the Cranial Torment demo, sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds bad. Like, they record it with one guitar. You can't hear it because the bass is so loud. The drums are very thin. Jari sounds great on vocals. That's kind of
Yeah,
uniform across the board. But the songs were almost more punk. And honestly, like, if this was like a Stoner Doom band's demo, I might give it more of a pass because, like, there's no crunch on those guitars. It's all fuzz.
It sounds like listening to a potentially good album through blown speakers.
Yeah.
Like, because you can't, like, you can kind of make it out, but, like, it sounds like just, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, it like a wall of blown bass amps and, you know, a rickety old guitar and bass playing. But style-wise, it was also, like, again, very rooted in, you know, kind of like the crust punk / death metal scene, because I heard way more punk riffs on it.
From what you could hear.
That is true, because I could hear Jari and a bass, and occasionally some drums.
Yep.
But the 1990 demo, granted, it is very rough sounding. I mean, it's a 1990 demo, but that's where you kind of hear them start to come in their own. Like, there's definitely still, you know, a lot of the Swedish death metal influence. It still kind of has that kind of like crusty D beat sound, but the guitars are way more prominent.
Yes.
Bordering on too prominent because you can't hear the drums in a lot of spots.
Nope, actually the drums are almost non-existent, and the bass just does nothing but hit brown notes.
Yeah, dude, the thing makes a thunk like someone flicking a doorstop. It's not like the best sounding demo, but musically, like, this is where you definitely start hearing them kind of coming to their own. Like, it's not quite as technical as what they would do on the full length, but it did sound really cool. And again, I like hearing like improvements from demo to demo before you get to like their first actual offering.
Yeah.
So what happened in this band that helped define a scene in Finland? The fuck if I know. Honestly, it was kind of hard to find reasons why they broke up. And honestly, I didn't find like a clear reason why they broke up, but they broke up the same year that this album was dropped. There were some tracks that popped up on a 4-way split called Weird Tales of Madness, and they were just older songs, so they weren't new ones. So that might have come out before or after this. Again, dates are kind of fuzzy here, but that was about it. Pretty much none of the members really continued on in music after this, as far as I could find. Like, I really did a lot of looking around and trying to spell those names in Google search. That was a lot of fun. I know that Sammy and Tony actually did a short project called Fungus. I don't know if it was necessarily death metal or anything like that. It really wasn't brought up very much on the archives. But they only had 2 demos, and then that was it. And then, I mean, outside of that, it was the former members from the early days that had short-lived bands after that, but nothing. Like, after that, it was just blank, and none of these guys did anything else in metal, as far as I know, which was kind of weird, because generally you expect, like, oh no, we continued on in this project and this project. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, and it's weird because they're clearly talented. Like, this music is definitely, trend-setting for the later years. Like, you can hear, again, so much of today's music in this band. Like, first of all, the guitar work in here is just nuts. And to throw that out the door, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, shit happens. I understand. Look at shit now. It's 2024. All sorts of crazy crap is happening all the time. But like,
I don't even know what shit happened.
Yeah, right.
Like, no, we're done. We're just ghosting the entire scene. But I mean, there might have been some contributing factors. Disillusionment with the music industry. Maybe they got screwed over in their deal with Spine Farm. Maybe touring was too difficult. They couldn't promote it properly. I mean, there's a lot of factors as to why bands call it quits and hang it up even after one album. So, I don't know, this band's kind of a mystery, but, I mean, honestly, you can still feel their impact on the Finnish death metal scene in stuff that is just currently being released. And that even goes across just the Finnish scene. Like, you hear a lot of these tropes in just death metal in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. That is the short story of Funebre. And Well, I mean, at least we got one really killer album out of them. But yeah, this was a lot of fun to go over, and we're looking forward to doing some more retro reviews. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel. But thrallsmetal.com is where you go to get Thralls Metal stuff. We have new shirts. We have old shirts at a discounted price. We even have hats. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
And last but not least, always stuff going on here at Thralls of Metal. Again, if you watched our live stream recently, there's a ton of new music coming, which means a ton of reviews. We got the retro reviews. We got What's John Jammin coming back. Probably going to have some interviews. Probably going to do some other cool shit, because that's what we do here. But we couldn't do it without you guys. Thank you to all of you that continue to stick around and talk to us and watch our videos and spread the word of Thralls of Metal. We couldn't do this without you guys. We are grossly appreciative to each and every one of you. Nick?
You guys rule, flat out. I mean, it's still amazing doing this. I'm looking forward to a whole other year of doing this. So once again, thank you all, and we will catch you later.